You know, it's fascinating how often people set out with the best intentions to stay disciplined, only to watch themselves fall short time and time again. It's not because they're lazy or incapable, it's because they're looking at discipline the wrong way. Most of us think discipline is about control. We create rigid plans, force ourselves into routines, suppress distractions, and try to overpower any part of us that resists. But here's the problem: control is exhausting. It's like holding a beach ball underwater. Eventually, it pops back up, and when it does, the effort you've spent trying to hold it down leaves you drained. This is why most people can't sustain their discipline. They treat it as a struggle, a battle against themselves, a way to force two conflicting parts of their personality to coexist. But true discipline isn't about force, it's about understanding. Why do you think so many people fail after the initial excitement of a new goal wears off? Waking up at 5 a.m. sounds like a good idea, but then the alarm rings, and suddenly the bed feels like the only place you're meant to be. The gym membership gets bought, but after a week it's the couch that wins. It's not because people lack motivation, it's because motivation itself is unreliable. It's an emotional burst, a fleeting push that fades the moment life throws a challenge your way. What most people don't realize is that this mistake, the one that causes 99% of failures, is trying to force discipline without first asking why they need it in the first place. Without understanding the deeper reasons behind their actions, they're just chasing hollow goals driven by societal expectations or someone else's definition of success. Here's the truth: the part of you that resists discipline isn't something to fight against. It's not the bad you trying to sabotage the good you. It's a signal. Resistance is your mind and body telling you something important. Maybe the goal you're chasing doesn't align with who you are. Maybe you're pursuing something you think you should want, rather than something you actually care about. Maybe the methods you're using are draining because they're unnatural to you. But instead of listening to that signal, most of us crush it. We label those moments of hesitation as weakness, push harder, and ignore the very feedback that could help us. Discipline built on misunderstanding is like climbing a mountain without knowing why you're climbing. You can train, push, sacrifice, but halfway up, the question creeps in: what's the point? This is why so many people burn out. Because the path they're on isn't theirs, it's borrowed from someone else. And when that realization hits, no amount of motivation or willpower can keep you moving forward.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
True discipline isn't about forcing yourself to do things. It's about alignment. When your actions match your core values, your deeper desires, and your authentic self, discipline becomes almost effortless. Think of a river. A person with real discipline doesn't try to fight the current. They don't waste energy paddling upstream. They build a boat that moves with the flow, harnessing the river's natural power to carry them forward. This is the difference between external discipline and internal discipline. External discipline is imposed, it's unnatural, exhausting, and always temporary. Internal discipline, on the other hand, comes from within. It's the result of clarity, of knowing what you truly want and why you want it. But here's where most people get stuck. They've never taken the time to figure out what they actually want. Their goals are borrowed, picked up from parents, friends, social media, or society's definition of success. They chase things that look good on paper, that impress other people, that promise some kind of validation. But those goals don't speak to who they are. And when life gets hard, there's no deeper reason to keep going. This is why most people fail to stay disciplined. They're building their lives on sand. So what's the solution? It starts with clarity. Before you think about discipline, before you set another goal, you've got to understand yourself. Not the version of you that tries to impress others, but the real you, the one that knows what truly matters. And once you find that, everything changes. Discipline stops being a battle. It stops being about control. It becomes a natural expression of who you are. But it doesn't stop there. As you grow, as you change, your goals and values will evolve, and so must your discipline. It's not a one-time fix, it's a constant process of reflection and adjustment. This is what separates the 1% who succeed from the 99% who give up. They don't just push harder, they listen, they adjust. They understand. And because of that, they move with the current, not against it. True discipline isn't about breaking yourself down. It's about building a life that fits you so well that the actions others call hard work feel natural. The question is, are you willing to stop fighting yourself and start listening? Because if you are, you'll realize that everything you've been chasing was never about control. It was about alignment all along. The problem with how most people approach discipline is that they treat it as if it's something you have to fight for every single day, like a constant uphill battle. And maybe that works for a little while. You push through, grit your teeth, and force yourself to keep going. But eventually, it falls apart. It always does. That's because trying to force discipline is like trying to hold your breath underwater. You can do it for a while, but eventually your body will rebel and you'll come gasping for air. It's not sustainable, but the real issue runs deeper than just forcing things. It's that most of us are chasing after things we don't even care about. Think about how many times you've set goals or made plans, not because they felt meaningful to you, but because they looked impressive or because you thought they were what you should do. Wake up early, work harder, lose weight, make more money, read more books. These are all fine goals, but they're empty if they're not connected to anything real for you. And that's why discipline fails. It's not the lack of effort, it's the lack of meaning. You're trying to force yourself to care about something that doesn't actually matter to you, and your brain knows it, even if you don't want to admit it. The mistake most people make is thinking that discipline is about willpower. They think it's about tightening the screws and grinding harder. But willpower is like a battery, it runs out. You can only push yourself so far before you hit a wall. Real discipline doesn't come from willpower. It comes from clarity. When you know what matters to you, when your goals align with your values, discipline becomes something you don't have to force. It's not about waking up and forcing yourself to go to the gym. It's about waking up and going to the gym because it's part of the life you actually want to live. That's the difference. When you're aligned with your values, discipline feels natural. But when you're chasing something you don't care about, even the smallest effort feels like a mountain. This is why so many people fail to stay disciplined. They're not lazy. They're just out of alignment. They're trying to live someone else's life, follow someone else's plan, meet someone else's expectations. And eventually, their inner resistance wins, because deep down, they know they're not on the right path. The key to staying disciplined isn't about pushing harder, it's about listening to yourself. Most people think resistance is the enemy, but it's not. Resistance is just a signal. It's your mind and body telling you that something isn't right. Maybe you're chasing the wrong goal. Maybe you're using the wrong approach. Maybe you're ignoring something important. But instead of listening to that signal, we bury it. We call it laziness, beat ourselves up over it, and try to bulldoze through it. And all that does is make the resistance stronger. The truth is, discipline doesn't come from fighting against yourself. It comes from working with yourself. It's not about controlling your impulses or forcing yourself to stick to a plan. It's about creating a life where the actions you want to take are in harmony with who you are. When that happens, discipline stops feeling like something you have to fight for. It feels like the natural flow of things. The challenge isn't to force yourself to be disciplined. The challenge is to figure out what kind of life you actually want, and then build your habits and goals around that. When you do, discipline takes care of itself. It's not about willpower. It's about alignment. The truth about discipline is that most people treat it like a tool for fixing problems, instead of seeing it as something that grows naturally when the right conditions are in place. They treat it like a hammer, constantly beating themselves into action, trying to force results, but they don't realize that discipline isn't what creates progress. It's the byproduct of clarity and alignment. When you're clear about what matters to you, when your actions align with your values, discipline becomes automatic. You don't have to fight for it, because it's not something separate from what you want. It's integrated into how you live. But when you're chasing goals that don't mean anything to you, or that you're only pursuing to meet someone else's expectation, discipline feels impossible. Every step feels heavy, every task feels forced, and eventually you quit. Not because you're weak, but because deep down, you know you're moving in the wrong direction. What most people don't realize is that the resistance they feel isn't their enemy, it's a signal. It's your mind trying to tell you that something isn't right. Maybe the goal you're chasing isn't yours. Maybe the way you're going about it isn't sustainable. Maybe you're focused on the outcome while ignoring the process. But instead of listening to that resistance, we label it as failure and blame ourselves for not trying hard enough. This is the core of the mistake most people make. They think that discipline is about suppressing their doubts, their impulses, their distractions, and just powering through. But that's a losing game, because resistance doesn't go away when you fight it. It grows stronger. Real discipline doesn't come from forcing yourself to ignore that voice of resistance. It comes from understanding what it's trying to tell you. It comes from adjusting your goals, your methods, or your mindset to create a life where the resistance naturally fades because it no longer has a reason to exist. The people who seem effortlessly disciplined aren't working harder than you. They're not stronger, smarter, or more motivated. They've simply built a life where their actions are in alignment with their identity. They're not trying to force anything because they've designed their lives in a way that naturally supports their goals. This is why discipline feels so easy for them. It's not something they have to think about. It's a natural extension of who they are. If you're struggling to stay disciplined, it's not because you're lazy or undisciplined. It's because there's a disconnect between what you're doing and what you truly value. The solution isn't to push harder or work more. It's to examine the gap between your actions and your values and find a way to close it. When you do, everything changes. Suddenly, the things that used to feel impossible become effortless. You don't have to fight yourself anymore because you're no longer at war with what you want. Discipline stops being a struggle and becomes something that flows naturally from the life you've built. Most people think that to be disciplined, they need to fix themselves, as if there's something broken inside that needs to be repaired. They assume that the reason they can't stay consistent is some personal flaw, like a lack of willpower, a weak mindset, or a failure to try hard enough. But the truth is that there's nothing inherently wrong with you. It's not about fixing yourself, it's about fixing your approach. Discipline isn't about willpower at all, it's about alignment. When your goals are actually tied to what you care about, when the outcome feels meaningful to you, discipline stops being this uphill struggle. It becomes something you don't even think about because it's simply part of how you live. The mistake most people make is that they focus on discipline as the solution without addressing the real problem, which is that they're forcing themselves to pursue goals that don't resonate with their values or their identity. They're putting all their energy into controlling their actions instead of changing the way they think about those actions in the first place. This is why resistance exists. Resistance isn't laziness or weakness. Resistance is your mind pushing back against something that feels wrong, something that doesn't align with who you are or what you actually want. It's like a warning system, but instead of paying attention, most people ignore it. They push harder, blame themselves, and try to silence that inner voice. But resistance doesn't go away when you ignore it, it grows louder. That's why it's so hard to stay disciplined when you're chasing the wrong things. You're constantly working against yourself, forcing every step instead of letting the process carry you forward. The people who seem to have unshakable discipline aren't superhuman. They've just built their lives in a way where discipline happens naturally, where their actions align with their values, and where resistance has no reason to exist because they're not fighting themselves. It's not about grinding harder or working more, it's about creating a system where the effort you put in feels like a natural part of who you are. Think about the difference between dragging yourself to do something you don't care about versus doing something that feels meaningful to you. One feels heavy, exhausting, and impossible to sustain, while the other feels effortless, like it's just part of your life. That's the secret. Discipline isn't about fighting, it's about flow. It's about creating a life where the things you do are in harmony with the person you want to be. When you're struggling to stay disciplined, the problem isn't that you're not trying hard enough. The problem is that there's a disconnect between your actions and your values. And until you address that, no amount of willpower will save you. The real work isn't in pushing harder, it's in figuring out what kind of life you want to build and aligning your habits to match it. When you do, discipline stops feeling like a struggle. It stops being this thing you have to constantly force. It becomes automatic, natural, and part of the rhythm of your life. That's when everything changes.